I've accomplished something that is more significant than curing the common cold or curing cancer, better than infinite energy, better than curing the corruption problem with politics. I think I have some ideas for reworking Mercy and reworking Moira. These are two of the most controversial characters in Overwatch 2 and Overwatch 1's history, and for good reason. Very simplistic design, but unlike some of the characters like Winston and Tracer, their simplistic design does not inherently lend itself to a high level of complexity, and many aspects of the kit are looked on as low skill, cheese, and very frustrating to play into. What we did here is, it wasn't really just me. In fact, it was very little of my input, more of my management than anything else. I asked the community on Twitter, my Discord, my educational community on YouTube, Twitch, everywhere, for ideas and what would you do to fix Mercy and Moira. I asked Mercy mains, Moira mains, tank mains, DPS mains, support mains. We did not discriminate because I think a broad spectrum of ideas is actually really important. You see, one of the dangers of asking what Mercy mains think Mercy needs is that there's an inherent bias towards what Mercy is right now. What Mercy is right now is a very myopic support that appeals to an only small percentage of players and does not appeal to the vast majority of players. And I think that's an inherent problem within the character design. The fact that a lot of players don't like playing her means that maybe Mercy mains opinions isn't all that we should be focusing on. I think people that aren't playing Mercy, I ask you, why aren't you playing Mercy? Well, because she doesn't do this. Okay, then what would you change? I think we need a balanced perspective here, because if you're playing Moira and Mercy in their current state, then I'm not 100% certain that I trust your opinion through and through. And I know that's going to hurt people's feelings, but it's true. And I think the same applies with a lot of the characters we're going to look at, because we're not just looking at Moira and Mercy. We're also looking at some small reworks of Zenyatta, for Ana, for Baptiste, and Lifeweaver. Now, I don't have an inner track of the devs. I said this in the last video we made with DPS, and I'm not saying that the other supports that we didn't bring up are in a perfect state. These are just the ones that came to mind as being the most problematic and the most needing of either immediate change and rework or just a couple of tweaks. Again, this was from a group project. We went through hundreds, literally hundreds of suggestions. This was probably around a 14, 15-hour project between going through all the characters, and we had compiled a list of ideas. Now, this is far from exhaustive, nor is it is also very far from being like complete. While I have a lot of ideas, I don't necessarily have a complete and tight package of how I want to deliver the character. A couple of exceptions. I think some of our On and Zen tweaks are pretty much complete, but most of this is just ideas, spitballing fun things, and you guys let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you have any good suggestions yourself, and we're going to start off with Mercy here. So before we talked about what do we need to change with Mercy, what do we need to fix with Mercy, we need to address what is actually the problem with Mercy. And I've got my second monitor here. I'm a big fancy streamer guy now as of the last few weeks, so I'm super. So a couple things here. Damage boost is low effort and high reward. It pushes the breaking point of certain skills, which causes them to be problematic, whether it's one-shots, even things like far rockets. It increases the viability of certain things too much, and it's a low effort and high reward. Resurrect. Broken ability. Certain compositions, it's very easy to get a resurrect. Certain compositions, it's not. The fact that you can only use it once or twice on an attack or a round, sometimes you can't use it at all in a game versus certain compositions. It feels really bad for the Mercy and feels really bad for the people playing into the Mercy. If I'm playing a sniper composition, res is unbelievably broken and very frustrating to play versus. If I'm playing Mercy into a dive composition, resurrect literally feels like a button that I can never press. Unless, even in Valk, it can feel very difficult. So that's a badly designed ability. A long cooldown and one that you don't even get to use off of cooldown. The pocket playstyle. Very simple. I pocket a character. I pocket another character that's doing something. That's not all that Mercy does, but that's what she does most effectively, and that's most of what she does, and that's why you pick Mercy over other supports. Can Mercy heal a tank? Yes. Can Mercy fly from point A to point B to point C and help different people in different points and times? Yes, but if that's what she does best, then that's when she's going to be picked in those circumstances. And the problem with Mercy is her niche, the thing that she does best, is very, very boring. It's very simple. There's a little nuance how it's executed. You damage boost unless they're low in HP, and then you heal them, and then you go back to damage boosting, and you keep yourself alive while you're doing that. But even the irony is that the movement aspect of Mercy, which even Mercy mains generally agree is the most enjoyable, fun, and challenging aspect of her kit, is in direct contrast with her pocket playstyle. You see, one of Mercy's strengths, not her best strength, but one of her very, very strong strengths, and probably the most fun strength, is that mobility. But it's the mobility that you don't really need to use if you're abusing the pocket playstyle. Now, you definitely need to use it. That's a little bit facetious, but you use it a lot less than you would if you're playing Mercy in a suboptimal way. You see, whenever I pick Mercy when I'm playing with a group, I find myself wanting to do things that I shouldn't. I find myself wanting to move around the map to help different people in the triage healer design. I find myself wanting to move when Guardian Angel cancel and super jump and bounce. I find myself wanting to heal and not just damage boost. But the problem with that is that's oftentimes not the best way to play Mercy. It doesn't even feel dopamine inducing to get a couple of these ticks when this heal sound, oh, it's like Mozart in my ears, and yet I do it so little over the course of the fight. And I think that's the problem. And that's not the only problems with Mercy. Valkyrie, boring ultimate to use. It's not a bad ultimate. It's just a fight starts, you use it. In fact, it's so unimpactful in terms of how it feels that I have one of the most common problems that I have as a coach is coaching players how to use it. Because unlike Transcendence, Rally, Sound Barrier, some of the other ultimates, it's hard to feel or know whether the ultimate was actually used properly. Low direct impact on the battlefield. Arguable definition of support is, do I support indirectly, directly? In Overwatch 2, it's been a lot more direct impact rather than indirect impact. And I don't necessarily have a problem with Mercy being indirect impact. It just can't be so one-dimensional. Very little transferable skill to other aspects, to other characters, which again is not necessarily a problem, but it is definitely an extreme. It is a caricature with Mercy. And if you've seen any of my other videos, I do not like caricature character designs. And then I also think her movement got easier and worse in Overwatch 2. And I think I'm not going to be in the minority when I say that. I think Mercy mains have been crying about this for a long time. And if you don't get anything else, if you made it as far as a Mercy main, I'm on your side. I am frustrated on your behalf with what they've done to Mercy, how they've never addressed any of the issues with damage boost and resurrect. They've taken away the fun aspects of her kit with her movement. They've gone on deaf ears. And I also think that there's a lot of inherent sexism when it comes to how we hate on Mercy mains just because there's a certain percentage of people that are female and play Mercy, therefore Mercy mains haha girls. And I think that is not what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about fundamental, direct, and objective aspects of her kit, and not the whole Mercy mains suck trope. Okay, now let's keep going on here. What do we fix with this character? There's a couple of ideas, and as usual, this is just ideas. I don't have an intertrack to the devs, and I'm very open to criticisms that you guys may have of these ideas. This is far from perfect. First thing, I think reversion or rework of the movement that was early on in Overwatch 2. I'm not familiar with all the details of that movement. You were going to go to other actual Mercy mains like SKSD, Neandra, other well-known content creators that will give you a better breakdown than I am. But they've made her movement worse. They've made it more one-dimensional. Even things like super jump feels so much less rewarding to get value out of because it's just so much easier. You can argue the details in this for forever. I'm not going to do that. That's not the purpose of this video, but this is the general line of thought. Super jump too easy. Vertical movement can be difficult to balance. I also wonder if there's an argument, and these are some details here, if there could be better sound effects for her GA, maybe to reward movement. One of the things that we talk about in a couple of these videos is not just the direct buffs and nerfs and changes, but also some of these sound effects to reward you for doing certain things, to make certain aspects of the kits more rewarding. We're going to talk in a little bit how Moira's heal spray not sounding good is one of the problems with Moira because it doesn't feel rewarding to do a good thing. Passive also deserves some debate as well. I don't like her passive. I don't have any suggestions for that. I think we could maybe rework her passive into some of the changes we're talking about in a second, but I think it's really, really boring. And again, because Mercy is not all the time healing targets that demand healing all the time, it's actually not that particularly useful. Let's talk about Resurrect. I've got 3 options for Resurrect here. It's far from exhaustive, but a couple of ideas that were thrown out there. And again, I went through hundreds of ideas. A lot of them, frankly, were quite bad. Here's what we're going to try and think. One was using Res as a small projectile. Think Suzu. It is an ultimate used when you generate the ultimate. It's thrown like Suzu. It does not cancel GA, so you can use it on the fly, throw your Resurrect as you're going by, like a Suzu. Can be blocked by shields. Can miss, has a small splash area like a Suzu, and it resets GA. So it's not a skill shot necessarily, but it requires some aggressive positioning, some aggressive play. It's something that would be tied onto the ultimate, can be blocked by shields, can miss, and allows Mercy to apply without standing in one location. And because it's an ultimate, it requires a little bit more of an investment from the Mercy. Okay, I better use this. This is my ultimate, right? One of the more controversial suggestions, but it was interesting enough that I thought I'd throw it in there. Not necessarily saying it's the solution, but it's an idea. Another one was something called a halo, where it is a pre-buff that you put on a target that lasts for 2 to 3 seconds, that if the target dies within the 2 to 3 seconds, the Resurrect is immediately applied. Now, that one also, like the projectile, could lead to some very frustrating circumstances but it's something that requires a little bit more thought, a little bit more game sense, and provides more nuance, more flexibility, more dynamics. You're gonna notice that word a lot today in how Mercy Resurrect is being used. Again, does it solve the issue of Res being probably the most frustrating ability in Overwatch 2? Maybe, maybe not. But at least I think it opens up more opportunities for the Mercy. Now, the last one is probably gonna be the most popular one for the non-Mercy mains, and that's gonna be no Resurrect at all, and just add utility elsewhere. One of my ideas was give her an ultimate that supercharges an ability used afterwards. It boosts your GA potency. It boosts your damage boost. We're going to talk about damage boost in a little bit. It boosts your healing for 3 to 5 seconds. Charge at a rate even faster than Tracer Pulse Bomb. It allows you to overclock your abilities for a brief period of time and allows you to take more aggressive engagements selectively. I think we need to find something that replaces Resurrect, but obviously we need something besides just delete Resurrect entirely because the character already lacks so much utility as it is. Now, couple other details, hang tight. When it comes to her gun, we're going to increase the projectile speed of the gun to make it more effective in certain circumstances. Now, I know I don't want Mercy to be a damaged character. I know, I'm aware, but the fact that your weapon is not even usable in the vast majority of circumstances, even to defend yourself, is a problem. I think the projectile speed is the #1 problem of that. I think we can shrink the clip by a lot if we increase the projectile speed. I'm thinking 15 bullets, 10 bullets even, if the projectile speed is significantly increased. Maybe also if we increase the damage of her bullets. From what I know as well, the hitbox of her bullets are also a little bit large as well, as you can see. So maybe shrink the hitbox just a tiny bit if we're doing this as well. Maybe a longer reload. I think the idea is that we want Mercy to have a skill-based defensive tool when worse comes to shove, but something that rewards aim, something that rewards a little bit of mechanical skill as necessary without necessarily making it an important part of her kit. We don't want her to be a damage and heal character like so many other characters necessarily, but something that when necessary, you actually have options, whereas now you just don't, okay? Right now, especially, it's just a spammy weapon. Nobody likes spammy weapons. It's very rare that you duel a Mercy and feel like, oh, she really earned that kill when it happens. It's usually she just smashed it at your head level and you happen to strafe into it. A couple other things, and this is the big one. Damage boost changed to a movement speed, cooldown reduction, and reload speed buff. In other words, you move 10% faster, you get your cooldowns 15-20% faster, 10% faster, and you reload 30% or 40% faster. Now, all of these numbers are totally open to change. I'm less concerned with giving the perfect numbers because I don't think you can give the perfect numbers from an outside perspective. It would require a lot more testing than things that we don't do any testing here. So I think, though, notice carefully that the things that we're talking about buffing, movement speed, cooldowns, and reload. All of those things have different benefits and drawbacks with different characters. Pharah benefits a little bit from the movement speed, benefits a little bit from the cooldowns, and benefits a lot from the reload, okay? But nothing over the top. Reinhardt benefits a lot from the movement speed, benefits a decent amount from the cooldowns, but doesn't benefit from the reload. Ashe benefits a ton from the reload, doesn't really benefit from the movement speed, kind of benefits from the cooldowns, and you can go down the list. You're gonna notice that there's a lot of characters from this boost, we'll just call it boost, that some characters benefit more, some characters benefit less in different aspects, but across the board, whether it's tank, DPS, or support, everybody has an aspect of their kit that is worth using, but it's not just, oh, certain characters benefit more from it more than others. For example, right now, Pharah benefits disproportionately, and generally high damage characters benefit disproportionately from the 30% damage boost. It's just easier to apply and more consistent. But if we're talking movement speed, if we're talking about cooldowns, then all of a sudden it gets a lot trickier about who needs to be boosted at which given point in time. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This is not an infinite resource. This is a resource that drains like Moira resource and is only regenerated through two things: time, slowly, and healing. That's right. We want Mercy healing again. We want Mercy to be healing again in a way that actually encourages her to move around the map, not only to selectively boost, but to selectively heal. And the heal beam decays on singular targets. This is a little bit of an idea. Let me know what you guys think of this one. 4 seconds before we start to decay. And the decay shifts from either 65 or 70 healing per second to 30 or 35 healing per second after it's been on the same target for 4 seconds. So you have incredibly powerful single target healing that quickly decays after it's been used for 4 seconds with an internal cooldown. Now, I asked a lot of the people in chat, I don't know anything about programming, and it's probably showing right now. But the idea was that you can set an internal cooldown between I heal one person and before I can heal them again. So basically it means that I can heal somebody for 4 seconds and it starts to decay slowly. But if I do this, like you think, oh, well, what if they do this and they do this and then just go right back again? You can set an internal cooldown on who you're healing. People are saying it's relatively easy to program. I'm gonna trust those people because I'm an idiot. Long story short, though, we have both we have a resource meter for boost, which no longer damage boosts but provides a broad spectrum of utility, and healing regenerates that boost. But healing one target is not going to do it. You're going to need to spread your healing around based off of the need of the fight and then selectively boost who need it. Now, you're going to notice something here. The idea that we're trying to imply here is we're trying to encourage Mercy to move. We're trying to force Mercy to move. If we can get Mercy to move more, we encourage her to risk her life more, which is good, but she also gets rewarded for that risk more than she does right now, which is also good. That's what we're trying to lean into. We know it's not good enough to have her movement feel better. You need to actually be encouraged to move more because Mercy right now doesn't need to be moving that much. And that's what needs to be changed. Now, again, this is just ideas. I'm sure you guys can come up with better ideas on your own, but this is the general vein, the general feeling that we want to be changing with Mercy. And that's more important than anything else. The numbers, I don't know about how long of an internal cooldown or how much healing or whether the healing should be decaying or not. I'm not as concerned about that. It's the concept, the philosophy that we're trying to go for. Let me know what you guys think. Looking, keep going here. Angelic boost, a cooldown for overdrive, small OT. Another cooldown people were saying for an overdrive. Maybe we talked about the ultimate being an overdrive. Maybe it's a small cooldown that gives you a little bit of extra speed in your GA, a little bit of extra movement, a little bit of better range in your heal. Maybe a small personal heal over time as a replacement for the passive. Maybe problematic with the ultimate, but just some different ideas. Now, here's a couple of weird ideas. You can shoot without interrupting beam or GA, or you do not need to weapon swap. Probably not. I think most folks would prefer her to not lean into the offensive side. Her weapon design is not particularly interesting, so I think that's probably not a good idea. Some other ideas, people were saying totally rework your GA to be 6-second GA, non-soul tied. In other words, right now, my GA is tied to the people. It's non-soul tied. I could just GA this direction. Burst like an echo shift, 15-meter range, omnidirection, super jump remains, and you can also slingshot, but it's on a longer cooldown because it's omnidirectional. Not sure how I feel about that one, but it's another idea. My idea was, why don't we rework some of her damage to where this actually does significant damage? Where her melee, my melee is not bound right now, so I apologize. Where her melee is actually almost like a taser, a bat, it does more damage. Maybe not, I wouldn't necessarily say a boop, but some sort of like tase, a bonk, short range, maybe something to lean into more instead of her weapon. And some people were also saying during Angelic Descent, which for if you guys don't know, her Angelic Descent is this right here when she's slowing down, maybe more horizontal movement speed to be able to utilize as well. But a lot of ideas with Mercy. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. The big idea is we want her to move more, and we want to lean away from the aspects of her kit that are really frustrating to play against, which is to basically sit in pocket. Mercy needs to move. Mercy needs to be dynamic. Mercy needs to be triage. And hopefully some of these ideas at least give you some ideas about what you think the character should be doing. Next comes Moira, everybody's least favorite and creepy aunt. Moira is a lot of fun in some aspects. I think the character design is really, really cool. But the problem is, let's go down the list, inconsistent impact. It can be very, very potent to put out a lot of healing in a small space of time. It can be very important to be able to keep yourself alive in suboptimal circumstances. It can be very important to be able to assassinate and pressure squishies. Yes, DPS Moira is a very legitimate and powerful playstyle in certain circumstances. But unfortunately, those two extremes, whether it's the heal bot or the full damage Moira, are not always consistently available. There's a lot of situations, a lot of maps, a lot of compositions where she just doesn't perform well at all. And unlike other characters, she doesn't have the ability to flex and change and adjust to be able to play around those things. And that's a problem. Remember, single targeted, I wouldn't say single target, but single dimensional characters become problematic, especially in the dynamic game of Overwatch 2. Unimpactful cooldowns. Fade is pretty good, but Orb, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Lack of playstyle dynamics. You're either DPS more, you heal more. There's just not a lot of utility there. Lack of skill expression, mechanical or otherwise. Obviously, Moira can be played with skill. I got to work with Nolan Corona, who is actually a phenomenal top 500 contenders Moira. But compared to other supports, Moira has the least amount of skill expression, arguably even compared to Mercy when it comes to the things that she can do both mechanically, cooldown decisions, positioning, all the above. Of course, there are nuances to her character. Every character in Overwatch has nuances, but she has among the least. Stat farm, boring. It's not good feedback to be able to farm stats till the cows come home. but actually not do anything with those stats. And again, this is where a character design comes into play. Does it actually affect how powerful the character is, the fact that she can farm stats? No, but it does make it a lot harder for lower rank Moiras to know if they're doing the right thing, if good stats don't tell you anything. And that's the problem with Moira, because she's very survivable, because she can farm stats. It really doesn't tell you how much you're actually doing. And that is a flaw that needs to be looked at. Too high value floor versus harder heroes. In other words, if I'm playing a Genji or Tracer, Moira is not only an easy character, but an effective character with little to no input from the Moira's players. And then if you're really good at Moira versus a really good Genji, really good Tracer, really good Cassidy, you don't have any option to outskill them. You just die. And so it's frustrating for high rank Moiras. It's frustrating for lower rank Genjis and Tracers. Now, some of you might be saying, oh, but it's okay to have low skill characters. Overwatch 2 developers have never, ever once said that there are any low skill characters by design in Overwatch 2. If they want all characters to be viable at all ranks, they've said this, and this is what we need to be doing to try and change that. Now, does that mean that every character needs to have a Tracer skill curve? Not necessarily, but it doesn't make it any less wise or admirable to try and aim for that, okay? Last thing is the bad feedback on the left click healing. It just doesn't quite sound as good, right? Until that heal over time kicks in. So I think that is something also, again, little detail like the stat thing. It feels like it doesn't matter that much, but I think it's worth bringing up here. Okay, couple of things with Moira. And these ones, like Mercy, very experimental. Let me know what you guys think. Multiple cylinder layer idea with the damage or ult beam to better reward accuracy. In other words, this right here does a certain amount of damage. This right here does more damage. The closer I am to the middle of my beam, the better my accuracy, the more damage that I do. Now that would mean that we need to nerf the damage on the outside of the spectrum. You need to be rewarded for accuracy. Another idea that was added is that you actually don't get the self-heal until you're actually directly on top of the target. So if you're here, a little bit outside the hitbox, nope. But if you're inside, yes. Another idea people were saying as well, that you guys are gonna think I'm crazy, was let her headshot with her right click. Now again, you're gonna have to adjust damage numbers if we're gonna allow her to headshot. Now I know that's inconsistent with beams in Overwatch, and I just don't care. Overwatch 2 is already inconsistent with a lot of aspects of the thing, so if it makes it fun, if it makes it interesting, then I think that we should be all for it. It's an idea, it's worth considering. I would not do both the headshot and the better aim, because obviously the headshot is the aim aspect, but something to consider. Same thing would apply with the ultimate as well, where this does a little bit less damage, this does more damage, just by a little bit, rewarding accuracy. No self-heal, we already talked about that. Reduce healing spray amount, maybe, leaning more into the heal over time. So the heal over time and raw spray is less useful, which makes you, but leaning more into the heal over time, either making it longer or a little bit more effective, adds a little bit more dynamics, makes her more flexible with DPS that she can spray and then let them do their own thing. I think that's one aspect of Moira that feels really good right now, is the ability to heal somebody and they continue to get healed for a little bit. It gives an actual pretty decent amount of nuance to how you heal with her, and it's just a shame that we don't lean into that a little bit more. Heal sound, we already talked about that, making that heal sound feel a little bit more satisfying, I think would be good to lean into as well. Now this is... This is the mother load. Hold on to your butts, guys. Now, there's a lot of ideas here. I don't think we necessarily need to do all of these ideas. These are just a couple I'm going to throw out there. First off, okay, bear me out because I've been cooking a little bit. Damage orbs stick like a casting grenade, but there's no magnetism. You just throw it out there. It's a fast projectile. Smaller hitbox, though, much smaller hitbox. I'm talking like a quarter of what they're at. So it's a skill shot. Small burst damage, like 30, 40 damage on impact, and then 30, 40 DOT or 50 DOT. We could also work it so that if you stick somebody with damage orb, that's the only time that you actually get self-heal off of your right click. There's a very careful balance of this ability where we want it to be a little bit more skilled. We want it to enable the Moira in some way, shape, or form, but we don't want her to be too weak in 1v1s because supports in Overwatch 2 need to be okay in 1v1s, but we don't want it to be too strong either. Could also be that we could make it so that if you stick somebody with damage orb, that's what allows you to right-click them on the head for damage. There's a lot of options here. I'm still cooking though, hold tight. We also thought that what if we gave Moira orb charges like Zarya bubbles, to where she could throw out one orb and then throw out another orb. However, you cannot stack orbs on the same target. In other words, if I throw a damage, you're thinking, well, what if I just damage orb somebody twice? 1, 2, and then I just went. When you stack a damage orb, like stacking a bubble, you actually just wipe the first application of that damage orb. So it doesn't double the efficacy, it just replaces the previous one that you've done. Another one we thought is if they are damage orbed, your right click does more damage, but there's a much weaker DOT. So we could talk about orb application damage. We could talk about orb enabling right click heal. We could talk about orb being what enables you to crit with your right click. We could talk about orb just enabling your right click to do more damage. But again, very, very fast projectile, much smaller. Can be blocked by barriers. And I think if we did this, we might want to nerf right-click range. It is a little bit absurd. I think that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. But like I said, just some ideas. I want to know what you guys think. One thing with the ult as well, somebody was suggesting maybe a weird idea is that you could either left-click or right-click to heal or damage emphasis. Otherwise, it does both. But if you left-click, it does a little bit more healing. If you right-click, it does a little bit more damage. That might be broken in lower ranks. I'm not convinced that we want Coalescence to do more damage than it already does. But it was an idea that I figured worth putting out there. Now, we're not done cooking. Here are some weird ideas. Hold tight. Somebody was saying, what if we gave Moira a different orb that allowed for a speed boost? So if you throw an orb here, during the path of the orb for 10 to 15 meters, there is an aura like a Kitsune Rush that increases your movement speed by about 20% while standing on the orb's path for about 2 to 3 seconds. So a speed boost orb. Told you it was cooking. Maybe heal orbs themselves get speed. Oh yeah, and did I mention heal orb is like damage orb and is a fast projectile that you can stick onto a target that maybe gives the target speed, but certainly gives them an additive HOT. So you could say, hey, I heal orb you. You're going to get a burst small heal, 50 heal, a 50 heal over time, 30, 40, 50 heal over time, and 10% speed boost for 3 seconds. And again, you can't stack that onto the same target. You have to use it, again, with the 2 charges. You could do a heal orb here and then damage orb in a 1v1. I'm telling you guys, I'm cooking. Last thing I had with orbs is what if I damage orb somebody, anybody hitting that target gets a small lifesteal in addition to the initial damage. So if I damage orb somebody, 15% of damage done to that target is returned as healing. Now that would be probably abused on tanks. So we might need to nerf the damage orb damage amount. Because the thing is, the lifesteal is useful, right? But what if the damage orb only does 30, 40 damage on impact and no DOT, and it's just the lifesteal? Or maybe it does 50, but no DOT. Well, 50 damage on a squishy isn't too bad, plus the lifesteal. It's not terrible, right? You know, that's pretty good. That'll be nice. But 50 damage on a tank is terrible. It's not very much damage at all. So you benefit from the lifesteal more on the tank, but you benefit from the damage more on a squishy. Okay? Bear with me. Another thing is when you do a heal orb, throw it on a target, that target now returns a percentage of their damage done indiscriminately to themselves. In other words, just think about how Junker Queen gets a certain percentage of her bleed damage returned to her. Imagine if I heal orbed a robot, or I guess a robot here, this robot here, right here, and a percentage of the damage this guy does to any target, not a damage or target, any target is returned as healing. Would that be broken in tank traits? If I heal orb my Rhine and damage orb the enemy Rhine? Maybe, but what if it's blocked by barriers? We already talked about this. And what if this percentage of the heal and the percentage of the damage is only like, let's say it's a 50 heal and a 50 damage. The lifesteal is still potent, but would I be better off by heal orbing my Tracer and letting her duel? That would be maybe even better. Or damage orbing the enemy Tracer so that she's forced to use recall because I can keep myself alive dueling her. Like, you kind of see what I'm saying. Weird ideas, something to consider. Last thing, this one was a weird one, but I think worth pointing out, as if I had to clarify it was a weird one. Weapon swap to puff healing on 1 second charge, and that's it. But it has a little bit more potency. I don't know how I feel about the resource management. I had some good suggestions from ARX about maybe utilizing the resource management a little bit better on the opposite extremes. I don't know how much I want to leverage into that, but maybe it's an idea. Another people were saying is that maybe make the damage right click a 3-second duration before a recharge, almost like Iliari's heal beam, but it goes for 3 seconds and then it has to recharge. And maybe like it ramps up damage wise. So it ramps 50, 60, 70, 80, ends. And it requires obviously more aim than it does right now. Like I said, really cooking in the kitchen. There's a lot of weird ideas. I really want your thoughts on the weapon with the accuracy and the crit and the heal and the better reward for aim. And let me know what you think of the orb things here. I think that would introduce a whole level of a complexity with the character, a lot of utility in how you want to be using, how you want to be supporting your team. And even if you're playing selfishly, there's a lot more dynamics besides just go on backline, throw a damage orb, right click, and just it's not interesting. I think Fade is probably mostly fine as is. There are some discussions about Fade being too far. Maybe the cleanse is a little bit too much as well. But I think those are, again, tweaks that we have to cross when we get there. Again, like I said, I know I cooked, but I think for Moira and Mercy, more than any of the other characters, you need a little bit of cooking because the current state is so bad that I think it deserves a little bit of extra, maybe too crazy changes because they're just bad right now. Okay, Ana. Zen, excuse me. This is where things get a little bit more simple because I think the character is mostly fine. He's a lot of fun to play. He's mostly fun to play against unless you're a tank. And there's going to be a couple of tweaks to the character. First thing, Discord is a little bit OP on tanks. It's a little bit too easy to apply to get a return on investment. No mobility, massive hitbox. Those are the bad and good things about Discord and Zenyatta in general. Now, I know a lot of people are like, just put Discord on a cooldown. I don't think that's necessary. Just make Discord a skill shot. I don't think that's necessary either. In fact, Discord skill shot would make it so that Discord is spammed even more on tanks. It's not the direction that we want to go. So here's what we're thinking. Pretty simple idea. Nerf Discord, which is 25% right now, to 20% or even 15% on tanks. Massive, massive nerf to Discord and still keeps Zen viable and winning 1v1s. It's still useful on tanks on a lot of circumstances, but it actually adds a lot more dynamics to it. There's already a decent level of dynamics to Zen. I don't recommend spamming Discord on tanks for any Zen right now, but it does give a little bit too much return on investment for too little thought. That's the problem. I think Discord distance needs to come back. The fact that they nerfed Discord distance and that was their Discord nerf is ridiculous. In fact, it rewards Discording tanks even more. I have no idea why that change was made. Look at this. I feel so bad that I can't Discord at this range, right? No wonder people are Discording tanks. And then in terms of additional Discord changes, I think shielding like this guy here should drop Discord after 1 second. Just like when I Discord somebody, I drop behind a wall. See how Discord drops off there? Shielding should do the same, whether that's a Sigma shield, a Ramatra shield, or a Rhine shield, anything. I think that would be a nice quality of life change for those tanks, and it makes sense. One buff for Zen, a very minor buff, is while we're nerfing Discord, make his hitbox a teeny bit smaller. If you guys haven't seen Karku's video on the hitboxes of various Overwatch characters, I highly recommend you do so because Zenyatta's is, quite frankly, ridiculous. The fact that this small of a character has a hitbox the size of a truck really, really makes his survivability in a lot of circumstances way, way too difficult. I don't think he needs more HP. I don't think we need to buff his damage. We don't need to buff his healing. We just need to make him a little bit more survivable indirectly through hitbox manipulation. Not much smaller, but a little bit smaller. A couple of weird ideas with Zen. I don't think these are necessary whatsoever. I think this is all Zen needs. Maybe people kick distance nerfed a tad. It is a pretty annoying boop. And while it is fun to use, it's probably not necessary to go as far as it does. And I also wonder about remember the whole patch change, the experimental patch where you could float into the air, having a little bit of mobility like that, like talking about like Zarya right click level of mobility, just a tiny bit up in the air might be fun to play with. Maybe I'm just smoking something, but I think it might be kind of fun to toy with. But for the most part, I think that the things that we listed at the beginning were more important. And I think Ana falls in the same category. We're going to move on to Ana. I think Nade sleep value is too high in tanks. Again, I don't think it's the most effective thing that you can be doing with Ana. But when in doubt, sleep, nade, tank. And I think that's a problem. That makes things frustrating for tanks, and it doesn't make Anas engage their brain too often, and I think that's a problem. So I think the support passive also massively boosted her survivability. They just recently nerfed that a little bit, which is nice. But I do think Ana is a lot of fun. I'm in a minority with the tank mains because I think Ana is a great character design and a lot of fun to play and is mostly fine. And I'm in the minority of the support mains because I do think that maybe sleep and nade can be nerfed just a little bit. There are people out there that have nuanced opinions. Let's talk about that. Really simple. I think nade duration just needs to go down a little bit on tanks. As it is right now, it lasts for 3.5 seconds, the same duration it lands on squishies. And if we just reduce that by either 1 second or even half of a second, I think it would be totally fine. Still useful, but a burst of anti-heal, not a consistent bleed on the amount of healing demanded by the most healing demanded role, which is tank. There's no reason for it to be the full 3.5 seconds on tanks. And then also just a small little detail. I don't know why they made the unscoped hitbox. This was a really minor thing, but they made the unscoped hitbox the same as it is when healing your teammates. So remember when you heal your teammates, you're like, oh, I can't hit. But it's actually a lot more forgiving when you're healing than it is when you're damaging. Well, they changed that recently. I think it was 3 or 4, maybe 5 patches ago, where the damage hitbox nerf, or the damage hitbox, is the same as healing. So I'm missing my damage, but then all of a sudden, let me actually see if I can get a good shot for you guys, literally here. My mechanics are not good enough to be able to consistently apply it. But it's actually the same hitbox as it is with healing. So it's noticeably easier to hit unscoped shots on enemies than it was before. And I don't know why they did this. I don't know if they wanted to make Ana more accessible for lower ranks, but I think she already had pretty high value through her cooldowns, even in lower ranks, and really her ultimate as well. I don't think this was a necessary change at all. I don't know why they made this change. Weird ideas. I think you could definitely argue that sleep duration could be reduced and even more. As it is, I believe it's 3.5 seconds on tanks instead of 5. I think that could easily go down to 3 seconds. I don't think anybody would be too upset about it. And another crazy one, which would probably not be good, would people were saying that maybe the damage reduction, in other words, the amount of damage that I receive while nanoed, is 50%. You take half damage on nano. People were saying maybe it's, instead of that, maybe give nano a slight speed boost, like 10% speed boost, and make the damage reduction only like 30 or 40%. I think it would be too busted on tank. I'm not currently a huge fan of the idea, but I thought it was useful or interesting enough to kind of put out there. All right, Lifeweaver. We're back with this boy. Now, I didn't go too deep with Lifeweaver. We definitely went a little bit with Lifeweaver, but not as much as the Moira Mercy, because I think some of his changes have been positive. He is still a pretty impactful character. I just think with Lifeweaver's issues, it's inconsistent utility, it's high raw numbers with really ease of like no real consistent application. Like your healing numbers are pretty crazy, your damage numbers are pretty crazy, but it doesn't seem to matter too often with a character. The heal numbers are potent, but sometimes feel a little bit too easy to apply. Clunky weapon swap still, and then very inconsistent cooldown value. His cooldowns can be very, very, very powerful in certain circumstances, but like Mercy, if the stars don't align, then you have a big problem. So, couple of details. I think his hitbox could use shrinking a little bit. I wonder what he would look like with a slightly smaller hitbox than where he is right now. I know they've done that already, but they need to do it again. He's still too massive. And I wonder if that happened, could we shrink his HP back to 200 again? I think that might be a good little compromise where he's a little bit more challenging to shoot, but not quite as tanky. Let's talk about his weapon. Couple of things. Lifeweaver has extremely potent healing, but it feels very frustrating and difficult to use. The fact that I have to right-click and hold the charge is not enjoyable to me. I do not enjoy that whatsoever. You lose charge if you take any other action, and it's constant. It's just totally constant. I would love if it was an auto-charge heal like Illari's weapon that charges up on its own. And also, if we were able to remove this, I don't know if there is a slow. Can somebody in chat correct me if there's a slow with right click? Maybe there isn't. I feel like there's a slight slow. Maybe I'm crazy. The weapon swap is still clunky. Could we spread this, speed this up? I think we can nerf the damage as a result, because if we reduce the weapon swap, it's going to make the character objectively stronger. So we're going to need to nerf the damage as a result. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem. If I could find more time to weave in damage as necessary, like a Baptiste, like an Illari, like a Kiriko, it would make this character feel so much better without this awful delay. Look at this. And the extra input, it's just unnecessary. Okay. I would also think it would be interesting if they leaned more into the heal, leaning more into the heal over time rather than direct heal. As it is, it's just the number on your screen. But what if they took 30-40% of the heal and made it into heal over time? I think burst healing in general in Overwatch is something that's a little bit controversial. So shifting it to more into heal over time not only would do something versus that, but remember, heal over time is very, very effective versus squishies. If I heal over time my Tracer, that gives her a slight advantage for the next 2 or 3 seconds. So as it is right now with Lifeweaver, it feels like you're constantly doing this or doing this and this. But now Lifeweaver would add an extra complexity where I can heal over time, pre-heal over time a DPS on an angle. I can pre-heal over time my Ana who's about to be dove. It gives you more dynamics with how you're healing. Another thing, heal probably shouldn't have ammo. I don't mind if it had ammo if it was auto-charge. I don't mind if it auto-charged or if it didn't auto-charge but it had no ammo. But having both is insult to injury. Maybe if we made it auto-charge and no ammo, it would be too broken. We might need to tweak some of the numbers. Maybe if we made it heal over time and auto-charge and no ammo, it would probably be broken, so we need to tweak some of the numbers. But these are all the things that feel bad about the character. We're going to have to tweak numbers to make it more balanced in the future, but all of these things together really are not fun. Also, in addition to that, maintaining heal charge. So I charge this up, I damage, and I come back to healing, and the charge that I previously had charged up should be able to be maintained. Like I said, a lot of tweaks, maybe not all at once. Certainly not without some sort of compensation nerf, but something that's definitely worth considering, because as it is right now, there's just so many things about the weapon that still feel bad, still feel unintuitive. I'm not allowed to find a lot of dynamics with my healing. I'm not allowed to find a lot of opportunities to put out good damage with the character, and I think that's worth putting some thought into. Moving on to the damage side of the weapon, damage does damage over time slightly, or small explosions, a little bit of small AoE damage, or needler effect, where the more times I shoot the target, A certain point in time, a certain threshold, there's a small explosion. And again, all of these things can be evaluated in terms of raw numbers. I don't think necessarily Lifeweaver's 1v1 damage needs to go up by a lot, but the character could be a lot more interesting in how it's used. If I hit a couple of shots here, a couple of shots, little mini bursts. Not even like a needler, like they literally just freaking die, but they take like an extra 30 or 40 damage burst. A small damage over time. Like I shoot a thorn, it does the equivalent of like a junk, like a 5 or 6 DOT. One bullet does 5 damage and 5 or 6 DOT, or 7 or 8 DOT. 7 or 8 DOT over 2 or 3 seconds. I think there's different ways that you could lean into that, and I think that would make the character feel a lot of fun to play. I also think I had a lot of complaints from my Discord about his projectile speed, about how it feels a little too slow, maybe just a little bit faster. I will say that if that's the case, then his spread definitely needs to be nerfed. If you guys didn't notice, one of the biggest buffs really that Lifeweaver has received is the spread, where at least, I don't remember how many bullets, first 8, 10, 15, someone in the chat correct me. First bullets don't have any spread. So you can absolutely snipe like crazy with this character. So if we did increase his projectile speed, did anything to his damage, we might need to revert that, because as it is, Lifeweaver right now has like actually insane range. It's by far the best part of his weapon. Okay, Petal, couple of things. I think a slight HP nerf. Anything that's not worth shooting is probably a mistake. If Ryan has so much shield that it's not even worth shooting shield, if Orissa's not even worth shooting when she's in Fortify because the damage reduction is too severe, then I think it's probably a mistake with the character design. Same thing with Ramatra's block and so on. And I think Petal falls into the platform, falls into that category for the vast majority of the times. I think too much HP for what it does. I do see some issues with it being broken more so by other characters than it is with others, but the fact that a lot of times Petal is just not even worth shooting in certain circumstances, I think it's probably a little bit too much HP. 50 HP less, that's my final offer. I also think some form of Petal elevation control to where you can go up and down like Sigma Shield would be a huge quality of life change and significantly increase the number of chances and circumstances with which you could use the Petal. And then now we're going to get into the weird things. So tree overhealth maybe applies to anti-heal. So if people are antied, the overheal applies to them. Might need to nerf the overhealth as a result in terms of the quantity, but it definitely would add a little bit of complexity. Not sure if I like it. Another weird one, maybe the dash heal nerfed to 30 or 40 or even back to 25, but give a little bit more range. I don't know if it's a good change or bad change, just an idea. Pull should cleanse. I feel like they should do that. I just don't see any reason why Pull, which is like a life-saving ability, does not cleanse. That one drives me nuts. I had an idea, and this is where we're really going to get into some smoky stuff here, where my initial problems with Life Grip and Lifeweaver and Petal, just poor utility. I was thinking maybe Life Grip could be a single target buff on like a 15-second cooldown that increases their attack rate and their speed boost slightly, kind of similar to Mercy's boost earlier, but it's a solo buff. And if it boosts speed boost and attack rate, maybe reload rate by a little bit, it is something that you could use on tanks. It's something you could use in DPS. It'd give him a much more interactive playstyle. I also thought maybe an overdrive ultimate instead of tree. Remember how we talked about that with Mercy, where her ultimate potentially could allow her to move and act faster? I think doing that with Lifeweaver with a regenerating bubble or of HP like Brig might encourage a very dynamic and active playstyle. Automatically descend Petal after no action. So yeah, people are also saying that like if Petal has been used and people step off and it has not been used for 1-2 seconds, it automatically descends, which gives it another use. Definitely a net buff, I think, in most circumstances. So we might need to address the cooldown or the duration accordingly, or the HP accordingly. But again, here, like it's better if we make abilities more flexible in how they're being used and not so oppressively strong at the one thing that they do. If you haven't picked up on that thread by now, I'm glad you do now. Last little detail, a little bit crazy with the weapon. What if we could charge up? So you hold down your left click and unleash a barrage of thorns. It's like a right, and then if you charge it up, kind of like a Zenyatta right click or one giant thorn. You just make one big thorn, go thunk, right? Kind of like a May icicle. It's an idea. It would require a little bit of balancing and tweaking as always, but it's something that's worth putting into. Last one, and this one is both the easiest and the hardest one because we were very easily able to identify issues with Baptiste. I think his exo boots are probably fine. I think his weapon is the best part of his kit. It's a lot of fun to use. It gives him a lot of dynamics and it feels great. But his CDs, man. His CDs are basically 2 extra lives, very situational, can allow the Baptiste to play more aggressively, but also tend to be very bad for team utility, and also are very inconsistent. Like if you haven't noticed something right now, a lot of our problems with heroes like Lifeweaver Mercy and BAP is that a lot of their utility and value is really, really too high in some circumstances, to the point where Bap is really the only Brawl Rein healer that you can play at any sort of a high level. But he's quite bad in a lot of other circumstances. He's even being replaced in spam, like Poke Wars, because his weapon utility, his cooldown utility really is just too weak. So one-dimensional, boring cooldowns. They both do the same thing. AoE, sustain, right? And if your team isn't grouped up around you, they don't get value. It's very difficult to lamp somebody from far away. Your shift has a very limited range. And even your right-click, right? Your right-click heal is very short, medium range. It's difficult to heal a Genji doing this, or a Hanzo across the map. So that makes Baptiste very unviable in a lot of circumstances. So we cooked just a little bit. Let me know what you guys think. Two things with regenerative burst. I'm gonna call it his shift for just right now. One was it increases your heal projectile speed, so you're able to heal on a faster, a longer range. It doesn't necessarily increase the rate at which you fire, but it increases the range at which the projectile speed itself, which allows them to go a little bit further. Maybe better, maybe while still maybe giving you an AoE support. I wasn't as good a fan of this idea. It felt like one of the weaker suggestions, but we didn't really have a lot of suggestions for his shift. The one that I liked the most, and this one was a little bit tweaky, was what if we made regenerative burst like a Briggs armor pack? In the fact that it's a single target, slow heal over time. I'm talking not even 2 or 3 seconds like it is with armor pack. I'm talking 5 or 6 seconds of 75 to 90 total healing. So even less than an armor pack in total potency. So we're talking about basically a passive Lucio RL for somebody for 5 or 6 seconds. That would be a massive, massive change for Bat, because it would allow him to actually support DPS and supports at range. Not for a broken burst heal like a lot of the other ranged heals, like Mercy and Brig. Less than even a Zenyatta Orb, but enough to impact the fight. Enough to allow Baptiste to support people that aren't directly on top of him. Not targeting yourself with this heal, or not targeting somebody else with this heal, would allow you to heal yourself for a slightly more. So one of the nice things about regenerative burst is I do think Bap needs some form of self-heal. It's a little bit too potent right now. They did nerf it recently, but I still think it's a little bit too potent. But allowing him to do that, maybe even have 2 charges so that he can only do one on himself, but he can also do one on a teammate on like an 8, 9, 10 second cooldown. Being able to heal this target for the equivalent of, like, let's say that much damage right now over 5 or 6 seconds would allow Baptiste to be played with Tracer, with snipers. It would give him so much more flexibility with where he could be played, and it would make him a little bit less oppressive in the small vicinity of where he's positioned. Maybe too weak of a replacement for regenerative burst, but it fills a little bit of a hole. It allows him to have his niche, but it makes him a lot more flexible in niches that aren't just Brawl. Now, Lamp was the trickiest one. Some people were saying that maybe Lamp is a damage reduction instead. So you can kill people through it, but it's a 20, 30, 40% damage reduction. You pop a blade onto a Lamp, you're still doing damage, and you can still kill people through the Lamp, but they have the equivalent of armor damage reduction. That would allow for it to be more consistent in its value, but also more consistent in its counterplay at the same point in time. Another idea for Lamp, and this one was a bit crazy, but was interesting, is make it a single target skill shot, where it's maybe not even a skill shot, maybe like a small buff, like a bubble that you place on somebody, where again, damage reduction, but it's single target and it can be applied at range. 2 to 3 second duration, and the cap of damage reduction around 30 to 35%. Now you're gonna notice something, that this would not apply, or this would only slightly increase the amount of damage resistance that a tank would have. In other words, if I Lamp boost my tank, they already have the armor damage reduction of 30%. So if we set the damage reduction to be 35%, they would only get slightly more damage reduction with the new damage reduction changes in the patch notes a few patches ago. Whereas if I were to damage reduction a Mercy, or a Zenyatta, a Mercy going under a res, or a Genji going for a blade, oh, by the way, think about that, a damage reduction on a blade, that would allow the target to go in a little bit more aggressively as if they had armor. And because it's capped at 30%, you're going to feel it, but it's not going to feel oppressive. It's going to give them more effective HP, but it's not even going to be nano boost level of damage reduction. So again, weird idea, maybe. I wish I'd had more ideas from Baptiste. He's not the most popular character, so I think I only had around 30 or 40 suggestions compared to some of the hundreds for the other characters. But these are kind of what we came up with. Now, 50 minutes in almost. That's what we came up with all these characters. The idea is to try to expand the dynamics to make the skill curve of these characters more interesting. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, these are all like really powerful abilities, or these are total trash. Remember that these abilities, you can only have 2 supports in your team. So think about all of this, and then think about Nade and Sleep Dart and Discord, and think about all the utility that Mercy currently brings, and the ridiculous survivability that Baptiste already brings. These things are going away if we're thinking about replacing them. This isn't a, they get this too, this is a replacing them. Like I said, I'm far from perfect. These are just some ideas. I thought they would be fun. I leaned more into, especially for heroes like Baptiste, Lifeweaver, Mercy, and Moira, stuff that would be more fun, and less that would be just small tweaks of where they're already at. Especially for Moira and Mercy, because I feel like their design is just fundamentally flawed in so many ways. I think that even if we go a little bit too deep, we cook a little bit too heavy, I'd rather do that and come up with some crazy ideas that maybe one or two are kind of interesting than to just play it safe and come up with something vanilla. So even if it's just a couple of good ideas, let me know which ideas you think in the comments. Let me know which ideas I was way off on, and share your own ideas. Again, we don't have any interact with the devs, but the way I look at it is that I don't want to criticize if I can't come up with something better myself, and that's what me and my community try to do. Cheers, and thanks for watching this long.